what if the reason you keep missing your targets or feeling just completely burned out by Friday afternoon isn't actually a lack of discipline?
Right.
Like, what if it's not that you aren't working hard enough, but that there is literally a mathematical error in the way you are structuring your internal sentences?
It sounds a bit absurd when you first hear it, doesn't it?
Totally.
I mean, the idea that grammar and algebra are the secret culprits behind our daily frustrations.
Yeah.
But that is exactly the paradigm shift we are looking at today.
And it's a massive one. So for you listening right now, whether you're, commuting to a job you're trying to excel at, or walking the dog, or just sitting at home trying to figure out how to navigate a really complex world, we're about to hand you a completely new set of tools.
A really powerful set of tools.
Yeah. Our mission for this deep dive is to decode what the source material calls the grammar of success. We've got an incredibly dense stack of sources today.
Oh, yeah. We're talking formal linguistic theory, conceptual mathematics, and a really deep philosophical framework.
Right. And we are going to explore how the words you use to define your life can actually be resolved into precise mathematical laws using the, what's it called, the pseudo-algebraic concept mapping system.
Exactly. And the ultimate goal here isn't just to learn some abstract math, The goal is to figure out how to literally debug your reality.
Debug it. I love that.
We are going to look at how yourself acts as the ultimate mathematical operator, the number one in the equation of your life.
Right.
We're going to map out where your friction is coming from, and then by the end, we're going to zoom all the way out to a profound metaphysical realization about who you really are in relation to the universe.
Okay, well, let's jump right in, because before we can start using math to debug our reality, we have to look at the deeply flawed way we are currently trying to navigate.
The old map, basically.
Yeah. The sources hit us with this concept right away. They say the map is your mind. But the problem for most of us is that this map is completely static.
Precisely. Let's think about how most people operate when they want to change their lives. You sit down, maybe on a Sunday evening when you're feeling highly motivated.
Oh, the classic Sunday night motivation burst.
Exactly. And you draft a plan. You write out this beautiful, pristine itinerary for your week. You tell yourself, okay, I will wake up at 5:30 a.m., I will meditate, I will be doing 90 minutes of deep, uninterrupted work, and then I will eat a perfectly macro-balanced lunch.
Right. And on Sunday night, that map looks flawless. I mean, it's the ideal route from point A to point B.
But what is the hidden assumption in that map?
That nothing goes wrong.
Right. It assumes an environment with absolute zero friction. It is a static map created in the past, applied to a Monday morning reality that is inherently dynamic, chaotic, and completely unpredictable.
So true.
So what happens? You wake up, but your kid is sick. Or you get an urgent, stressful text message at 6 a.m. Suddenly, that static map isn't just unhelpful. It actually becomes a source of psychological pain.
Because you feel like you're already behind.
Exactly. The friction ruins the plan.
Yeah.
And because your map is rigid, you have no mechanism for recalibration.
Yeah.
You just feel like you failed the day before it even started.
And the sources refer to this state as living on autopilot. Like, we are essentially navigating life on default settings.
Default settings.
We've inherited these emotional scripts from our childhoods. We've absorbed cultural expectations about what success looks like. And we just, let those programs run in the background.
Which is why the text argues that we have to fundamentally shift our relationship to our own cognition. We have to transition from being on autopilot to becoming the architect.
The architect.
Right. Now, a lot of self-help material compares the mind to a computer operating system with different apps running. But to really understand the depth of what the sources are saying, we need a slightly more robust metaphor.
Okay.
Think of your mind less like a smartphone and more like the underlying physics engine of a massive, complex video game.
Oh, I like that. Unpack that for me a bit.
Well, when you are playing a video game, you are focused on the surface level, right? Your character, the enemies, the obstacles.
The stuff happening on the screen.
Yeah. Those are your everyday thoughts, the grocery list, the anxiety about a deadline, the replay of an awkward conversation. But beneath all of that is the physics engine.
The code.
It's the deep code that dictates the gravity in the game, how fast your character can run, or what happens when two objects collide. Most of us live our entire lives totally unaware of our own physics engine.
We just keep mashing the buttons on the controller.
Wondering why our character keeps running into an invisible wall. Yeah.
So we're just throwing sheer willpower at a structural problem.
Exactly. The text calls this deeper layer the meta-mind. It uses a brilliant theater analogy, actually.
Oh, right, the actors on the stage.
Yeah. It says your everyday thoughts are the actors on a stage. They're dramatic, they're loud, they're demanding your attention. But the metamind is the attentive audience.
It's watching the play.
It can sit back, notice the play, reflect on the plot, and realize, wait a minute, I don't just have to watch this tragedy unfold. I can step out of the audience, walk up to the lighting booth, and literally rewrite the script.
Okay, let me stop you right there because I really have to push back on this.
Up for it.
If I'm listening to this on my way to work, my brain already feels incredibly overwhelmed. I mean, the text itself jokes about the modern mind feeling like a 200-tab browser with no ad blocker.
It's a great line.
It is. But if I'm already exhausted just trying to get through my daily to-do list, isn't becoming the architect and engaging this meta mind just adding another massively draining background app that I have to track?
That is the most common and, frankly, the most logical hesitation people have.
Because it sounds exhausting.
It does. But it fundamentally misunderstands what the metamind is doing. Becoming the architect is not about adding another tab to your mental browser. It is about finally getting the administrative access required to close the 190 tabs you don't need.
Okay, so it's not more work. It's better access.
Right. Think back to the video game physics engine.
Huh.
Right now, you are merely a user of your mind. You are subject to whatever glitches and pop-ups appear.
Yeah.
Engaging the metamind is about getting the developer's password. When you have developer access, you don't micromanage every single jump your character makes.
You change the rule.
You go into the deep code, you rewrite the rule for gravity, and then the system runs smoothly on its own. It actually requires significantly less daily effort because you aren't constantly fighting against your own default settings.
You fix the structural code so that when you hit friction, the system absorbs it automatically.
Precisely.
That makes total sense. We're moving from being a stressed-out player to the developer who just fixes the bug in the code.
Exactly.
But, I mean, if we are going to act as the architect, we need to know the coding language. We need the actual syntax. And this brings us to what the sources call the grammar of success.
Yes. And this is where we start dismantling the language we use every single day. The words we use aren't just descriptive, they are structural.
The text argues that we frequently use words interchangeably that actually represent vastly different cognitive architectures.
The prime example in the text is the distinction between three words: goals, targets, and orientation.
Now, colloquially, we treat these as exact synonyms, like my goal is to get healthy or my target is to get healthy.
Yeah, they sound the same.
But the sources draw a massive line here. Let's start with a goal. The text defines a goal strictly as a noun.
A noun, meaning it is a static destination. It is a fixed endpoint or a permanent state of being.
Like, I want to weigh 180 pounds, or I want to publish a novel, or I want $1 million in my retirement account.
Those are goals. They have positional reality. You can measure them in space and time. You either hit the number on the scale or you didn't.
But the text points out a fatal flaw with goals, doesn't it? It says they offer absolutely zero navigational guidance.
Let's ground this. Imagine you are lost in a dense forest. You know your goal is New York City. That is the noun. But knowing the noun doesn't actually help you take your very next step if you don't know which way is north.
Oh, that's a great point.
Goals are passive destinations waiting for your arrival. They do not generate momentum, and they do not tell you how to move around the giant boulder sitting right in front of you.
Which brings us to the next linguistic layer, which is the target. If a goal is a static noun, a target is a relative position. It is a noun expressed as a verb.
It is the continuous direction you are aiming toward.
Listen to the shift in phrasing here, or for you listening. Instead of the static noun health, your target is orienting toward health.
Right. Instead of the noun a published novel, your target is targeting mastery in daily writing.
A target is inherently active. It requires constant, real-time recalibration based on where you currently stand.
And beneath the target is the deepest, most foundational level orientation.
The sources describe this as a point within a point.
Orientation is the active, microscopic, daily behavioral practice of aligning yourself with the target.
The archery analogy in the text makes this incredibly visceral.
I love the archery analogy.
Setting a goal is simply walking out into a field and nailing a paper bullseye to a tree. That's it. You've established a noun.
But the target and your orientation to it is the actual discipline. It's the physical practice of picking up the bow, checking your posture, Knocking the arrow, feeling the subtle shift in the wind, adjusting your breathing, and releasing.
And crucially, knowing that even after the arrow leaves the bow, a sudden gust of wind might still blow it off course.
Exactly.
But because your focus is on the orientation, the mastery of the aim, you don't collapse into an existential crisis when you miss the bullseye. You just nock another arrow, adjust for the new wind pattern, and fire again.
There's a direct, profound quote from the text on this. Mastering orientation making, aiming second nature, eliminates the need to force goals. They emerge naturally from sustained, well-directed effort.
That takes the crushing psychological pressure off the outcome, doesn't it?
Completely. And it places all your power back into the present moment process.
But to execute that process, the text introduces a concept that sounds almost like a sci-fi weapon, but it's actually a grammatical tool: the wieldable nounship.
Wieldable nounship. I love this concept. It charts the progression of how an idea becomes a tool. Let's say you start with a verb. To create.
Okay, an action.
It's an action, it's dynamic, but it's fleeting. It only exists while you are doing it. So you try to solidify it into a noun, creativity.
But creativity is just an abstract concept. It's an ethereal trait.
Exactly. And you cannot really do anything with a plain noun.
What do you mean?
Well, the universe or the market or your boss doesn't respond to abstract concepts. If you walk into a job interview and say, "I possess creativity," the interviewer doesn't know what to do with that.
Right, it doesn't solve their problem.
So the text says you must forge that abstract noun into a wieldable nounship. You become a digital content creator or an architectural draftsman.
Oh, I see. It's the difference between having an abstract desire and possessing a forged, sharpened tool in what the text calls your portfolio of power.
Yes, you need a wieldable nounship to actually interact with reality.
But I want to make sure this is really clear for the listener. What exactly is reality in this context? The text uses the term universal node. What is a universal node, and why does it only respond to a nounship?
That's a vital question. A universal node is just a specific point of friction or interaction in reality. It could be a person, a market, a specific problem, or a physical barrier.
Okay.
Let's say the universal node is a flooded basement in your house. That is the reality you're facing.
A very stressful reality.
Right. Now, if you stand at the top of the stairs and throw the abstract noun helpfulness at the flooded basement, nothing happens. The water doesn't care about your helpfulness.
Right. It's just going to keep flooding.
The flooded basement is a node that only responds to a very specific wieldable nounship, a licensed plumber. You either have that ship in your personal portfolio of power, or you have to go hire someone who does.
Okay, this is where the psychology of this gets fascinating to me. Because if you understand this framework, it completely changes how you process failure.
Oh, fundamentally.
Let's say you are single. You go on a first date, and it's a total disaster. The person doesn't call you back. If your identity is tied to an abstract noun like lovability or worthiness, you interpret that rejection as an existential crisis. Like, I am not lovable. I am a failure.
Yes, and that just destroys your momentum.
But if you are operating with the grammar of success, failure is completely desensitized. The date wasn't a referendum on your soul.
No, the other person is simply a universal node providing you with neutral data.
The data point just says, my current portfolio of power lacks the specific conversational nounship or the emotional availability nounship required to interface with this specific person.
It turns emotional devastation into strategic inventory management. You look at your toolkit and realize, oh, I need to forge my active listening skills into a stronger ship.
It completely removes the ego from the sting of rejection.
It does. But, having a wieldable nounship is only half the battle.
Right, because language, even precise language, is still somewhat subjective. We lie to ourselves all the time.
We do. So how do you know your nounship is actually working? How do you measure the forces acting against it?
This is where the source material takes a massive, revolutionary leap. We transition from linguistics into formal logic. We enter the pseudo-algebraic concept mapping system.
The math.
The math. Okay, so having a wieldable nounship is great for my mindset, but we need a rigorous structure to test our reality. But before we get to the formula, the text makes a really wild connection.
Yeah, it draws a direct line between Noam Chomsky's linguistic theories and conceptual mathematics.
Wait, Chomsky, the linguist. What does universal sentence structure have to do with me trying to launch a startup or stick to a gym routine?
It's a brilliant conceptual bridge. Chomsky's famous theory of universal grammar posits that humans have an innate, underlying cognitive capacity to generate an infinite number of complex sentences using a finite set of grammatical rules.
Nouns, verbs, prepositional phrases.
Exactly. They combine in predictable ways to create infinite meaning.
Okay, I follow that.
The source text takes that idea and scales it up to reality itself. It argues that just as we can generate infinite sentences with finite grammar, we can map out the infinite complexity of our lives using a finite set of mathematical operators.
So language isn't just a way to describe reality after the fact.
No, the structure of our language is the structure of our reality.
Yeah.
And to map it, the system gives us a foundational integration formula.
And the formula looks like this. A over B integrated with C over D. Written out visually, it is A/B, a plus sign inside a circle, and then C/D.
Let's unpack this equation.
Yeah.
Because it looks like high school algebra, but it represents the literal architecture of your daily life. Let's look at just the first fraction A over B.
Okay, let's define the variables. In this notation, the numerator, the top variable, A, is called the iterator.
The iterator represents the content. It is what you are bringing to the table. It is your raw talent, your physical energy, your specific skill, or your focus.
Okay, so A is what I possess, and the denominator, the bottom variable, B, is the delineator.
Yes. This represents the context. It is the environment, the physical constraints, your daily schedule, the financial budget, or the cultural shaping force that the iterator, your talent, has to pass through.
And here is the absolute unbreakable golden rule of this pseudo-algebraic logic. The denominator always governs the numerator.
Always. The context always shapes the content. The delineator acts as a physical or psychological filter for the iterator.
Let's really dig into the why and how of this because it challenges a lot of our modern assumptions.
It really does.
Like, why does B always win? If I am listening to this and I think, look, my work ethic is a 10 out of 10, my talent is massive, shouldn't my sheer willpower A override a bad environment B? We are constantly told that hustle and hard work beat everything.
And this mathematical model explains exactly why hustle culture is a recipe for catastrophic burnout.
Okay, break that down.
Let's look at the underlying mechanism, both physically and cognitively. Let's say variable A is your raw talent as a writer. Variable B is your physical environment. Let's say you are trying to write your novel in the middle of a loud, chaotic, incredibly stressful, open-plan office.
Sounds like a nightmare.
It is. Now think about cognitive load. Your brain only has a finite amount of ATP cellular energy to spend at any given moment.
Right.
If your denominator, the office, is chaotic, your brain is forced to spend 80% of its available energy just processing the noise, the interruptions, and the stress hormones. The environment is literally eating the resources required for your talent to express itself.
Oh, wow. So it doesn't matter if the value of A is 1,000,000? If the denominator is a tiny clogged pipe, only a trickle of water is getting through.
Exactly. The denominator is the physical reality you are pouring your conceptual talent into.
Yeah.
You can pour a gallon of water, but if the funnel only have a pinhole at the bottom, it's going to back up and overflow. The environment always throttles the output.
This completely changes how you diagnose problems in your life.
It really does.
Instead of waking up at the end of a long week and vaguely feeling like a personal failure, you can look at your life through this equation. Is the problem variable A? Do you actually lack the skill?
Or is your skill perfectly fine, but variable B, your daily schedule, your toxic boss, your lack of sleep, is acting as a restrictive denominator.
It gives you precision, and it introduces what the text calls the fourth quarter principle.
The fourth quarter principle states that true 100% expression of any goal requires structural overlap. You cannot rely entirely on your internal drive, the numerator.
You have to meticulously design the denominator, the context, the schedule, the community, so that it actually facilitates the numerator. You must align the pipe with the water pressure.
Okay, so that's the first fraction. But the equation is A over B integrated with C over D. Let's look at the second half.
Maybe C is your natural curiosity, and D is the intellectual community you surround yourself with.
Right, and connecting these two fractions is that very specific mathematical operator, the circle with a plus inside it. It's the synthesis operator.
This is a crucial distinction, and we need to understand the mechanism here. That synthesis symbol does not mean simple addition.
No, it represents emergence.
Explain emergence. Give me the explain like I'm 5 version.
Think of a chemical reaction. If you take sodium, which is a highly reactive metal that explodes in water,
Okay.
and you add chlorine, which is a toxic, lethal gas.
So we have explosive metal and toxic gas.
Right. You don't just get a toxic explosive mixture. When they synthesize, they undergo emergence, and they become sodium chloride, table salt.
Oh, wow.
Something entirely new, stable, and essential for life.
The whole is entirely different from the sum of its parts.
Precisely. It is the process by which distinct elements combine to create properties that transcend the sum of the components. When you synthesize your talent, filtered by your schedule A over B, with your curiosity, filtered by your community C over D, you don't just get A plus C.
You get an entirely new emergent state of capability. It is alchemy, mapped out in algebra. Okay, we have this powerful formula. We understand iterators, delineators, and emergence. But if we just leave this equation sitting on a whiteboard, it's just abstract math.
Right. It doesn't do anything on its own.
A battery has potential energy, but it can't turn itself on. Where do you, the actual listener, fit into this formula?
This is where we enter the rhetorical resolution process. The text makes a profound observation about psychological traits. Variables like your work ethic, your data quality, or your empathy are what the text calls capacitant.
Meaning they hold capacity, just like a capacitor in an electrical circuit. It holds a charge.
Yes, they hold immense potential energy. But, and this is the key, they are not agentic.
They can't act.
They cannot act on their own. Your work ethic cannot set an alarm, wake itself up, and go to the gym. Your empathy cannot actively comfort a grieving friend. Capacitant variables require a conscious agent to complete the circuit and activate them.
And that agent is the self. Enter the self as the unity operator, represented in the math by the number 1.
The self is the universal interface through which all these conceptual variables become operational physical reality.
It is brilliant notation. By placing the number 1 into the equation, you declare exactly where your conscious agency sits in relation to the variables in your life. You are defining your position of 1.
Let's walk through the 2 fundamental configurations for where you can put the 1, because this is the core of how you apply this to your day. Configuration A is x over 1.
In this configuration, x the variable is the numerator, and 1u the self is the denominator.
And since we know the golden rule, the denominator always governs the numerator, this means I am governing x.
Exactly. The translation of x over 1 is I use x. You are the shaping force. You are actively wielding the variable as an instrument in your hands. This is known as iterator mode.
So if the variable is my curiosity and I write curiosity over 1, I am actively declaring, I direct my curiosity. I decide what I'm going to research today. I am wielding my curiosity to solve this specific engineering problem.
Correct. You are in active, conscious command of the asset. Now, configuration B is the exact structural opposite. It is 1 over x.
The 1u is now in the numerator and the variable is in the denominator.
So now the variable is governing you. The translation of 1 over x is x shapes me. You are consciously yielding to the variable as a governing principle. This is delineator mode.
Give me a real-world example of when I would intentionally want a variable to govern me. Isn't that just giving up your power?
Not at all. It is strategic surrender. Let's say the variable is your weekly schedule. You spent Sunday acting in iterator mode x over 1 to painstakingly build a perfect calendar.
Right, you built the map.
But when Monday morning hits, you need to switch to 1 over x. You write 1 over schedule. You are declaring, my schedule governs me. I surrender to the routine.
So you aren't constantly fighting or tweaking the calendar every 5 minutes, agonizing over what to do next. You are trusting the structure you previously built and letting it carry you through the day.
It removes decision fatigue.
Exactly. The text uses a really simple, elegant example to show why physically writing down your position of 1 changes your behavior. Imagine you have a goal on your daily to-do list. Walk home.
It's just a verb and a noun. That seems clear enough.
But operationally, it is full of ambiguity. Walk home when? Walk home how? Are you power walking for cardio or strolling to decompress? Are you walking home despite the thunderstorm or only if it's sunny?
A plain command lacks agency. It's floating in the void.
But if you rewrite that to-do list item as walking over 1, suddenly it is an executable mathematical instruction. It means I actively wield walking as my instrument. I am the conscious governor of this activity. It transforms a vague chore into an expression of agency.
And this mathematical framework is radically inclusive. This is one of the most beautiful parts of the source text.
It really is.
Because the 1, the self, is a unified, indestructible interface. It operates perfectly regardless of the physical capacity of the variables attached to it. The text provides a deeply moving example comparing a high school track athlete and a paraplegic individual.
Yes, let's explore that, because it proves the robustness of the math. Both individuals might be engaging with the exact same conceptual no-to-gold medal track winner.
For the high school athlete, Their physical running capacity is a variable they can actively wield in iterator mode. They can place physical exertion in the numerator and themselves in the denominator exertion over 1.
But for the paraplegic individual, profound physical constraint is a reality. They
Um,
cannot put physical exertion in the numerator.
but the formula doesn't break.
No, it doesn't, because the self, the one, remains perfectly intact. The paraplegic individual still places their one in the equation, but they simply interface with different variables.
Like what?
They might wield their depthly analytical mind, their tactical understanding of the sport, or their emotional intelligence to become an elite track coach. The one just reroutes the activation energy to the available variables.
The self is the constant. The variables are just the interchangeable tools on the workbench. It proves that agency is not determined by your physical capacity, but by the conscious positioning of yourself in relation to whatever capacities you happen to have.
Exactly.
But let me play devil's advocate here, because I know how my own brain works, and I know how a lot of high achievers think.
Go for it.
If putting the 1 in the denominator x over 1 means I'm in control, I am the governor, I am wielding the weapon, isn't it incredibly tempting to just want to be the 1 in the denominator for absolutely everything?
Oh, of course.
Like, I want to govern my career, my relationships, my health. But honestly, doesn't constantly trying to wield everything lead to absolute total burnout and alienation?
Yes, absolutely. It is a psychological trap. And this is where the genius of the mathematics system really shines. The system mathematically anticipates this exact danger.
How so?
If you stay trapped in X over 1 mode,
Hmm.
always dominating, always pushing, always forcing your will onto every single variable in your life, you will break yourself and you will break the people around you.
Mm.
This exact danger is what necessitates the next major concept in the source material, the inversion kick.
The inversion kick. It sounds like a move from a martial arts movie, but it's actually a structural requirement for psychological survival.
Because trying to dominate the equation leads to collapse, the system requires us to test our balance by intentionally alternating between wielding and yielding. We have to engage what the text calls the full expression.
The full expression is a massive, incredibly detailed two-pass mathematical test. It is designed to expose whether you relate symmetrically to the variables in your life or if you have hidden ego biases where you are secretly always trying to play God.
Let's visualize this full expression. It maps 4 variables, A, B, C, and D. For the sake of a real-world example, let's say these are the 4 pillars of a creative project. A is your creative vision. B is the client's budget, C is your team's energy, and D is the market deadline. The equation tests how you interact with all of them.
The left half of the equation represents your initial orientation. It encodes a specific pattern. It says, I wield A over 1, but I yield to B1 over B.
It synthesizes the active and the passive. You are in control of one element, but you are intentionally surrendering to the structural boundary of another.
So using our project example, that looks like I wield my creative vision, but I yield to the client's budget constraints. I am fierce and active in the creation, but I humbly accept the financial reality. That is a healthy synthesis.
Exactly. But the full expression doesn't stop there. It then forces you to run the right half of the equation, which is the inverted orientation. Every single agency position is flipped.
The inversion kick.
Right. Now, the equation demands the exact opposite. I yield to A1 over A, but I wield B over 1.
So, to continue the analogy, I yield to the creative muse, letting unexpected inspiration shape me rather than forcing an idea, but I actively wield the client's budget, aggressively negotiating to protect our resources.
It forces you to prove, mathematically, that you can operate dynamically. The equation acts as a diagnostic tool. If the two halves, the initial orientation and the inverted orientation, produce wildly different results, or if attempting the inversion kick causes you extreme psychological anxiety, you have successfully diagnosed an asymmetry in your personality.
You've diagnosed that you only know how to dictate to your team, but you are terrified to listen to their feedback. Or, conversely, you've realized that you are great at submitting to deadlines, but you are paralyzed by the thought of taking creative control.
And the consequences of refusing to ever yield and put the 1 in the numerator are not just personal burnout. At a systemic level, they are catastrophic.
The sources go into a really heavy example here.
They do. To illustrate this, the source text provides a chilling historical analysis of World War II, specifically examining Adolf Hitler's military strategy. And it frames this not just as a historical event, but as the ultimate psychological case study in cognitive mapping failure.
And we should be very clear here for the listener. We are looking at this strictly through the analytical, mechanical lens provided by the source material. We are examining the architecture of strategy, cognitive bias, and operational failure. We are impartially reporting how the text breaks down this specific historical example to illustrate a universal point about what happens when a system refuses to yield.
Yes. The text defines this failure as the fatal flaw of supremacy. Supremacy, the text argues, is a profound strategic liability. Why? Because it relies on three major cognitive distortions that completely break the mathematical interface with reality.
Let's break down those distortions. The first one the text identifies is the myth of divine infallibility.
This is the delusion of unilateral control. It is the absolute refusal to ever operate in 1 over X mode. Hitler adopted a self-image of infallibility. He believed his sheer will alone was the governing denominator of reality. Therefore, setbacks weren't seen as neutral data points, as we discussed earlier with the noun ships. They were perceived as tests of faith or failures of loyalty by subordinates.
The text gives the specific example of Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. His generals warned him about the logistics. They brought up the vast, impossible distances, the lack of supply lines, and the approaching Russian winter.
Those warnings were accurate, critical data points. They were the environment, the denominator, trying to govern and shape the strategy, the numerator.
But because his internal mapping system rigidly refused to yield to the environment, he dismissed the data entirely. He believed the sheer force of will could endlessly overcome the physical constraints of reality. The result was the catastrophic freezing loss at Stalingrad. He refused to allow reality to shape his strategy, so reality destroyed his strategy.
The second distortion the text highlights is the fiction of enemy inferiority. And this connects deeply to how we map the variables in our equations.
Yes. Nazi ideology demanded the belief that their adversaries were inherently biologically inferior. This arrogance completely warped their ability to accurately assess the variables on the global board. Because they viewed the Soviet Union as subhuman, they dismissed its massive industrial capacity and resilience. Because they viewed the United States as decadent and weak, they failed to anticipate its overwhelming manufacturing power.
And the text points out that this same ideological rigidity caused them to actively purge brilliant scientific and mathematical minds from their own universities, literally depriving themselves of the very intellectual resources they needed to win the war. It is a mathematical failure to accurately assess the capacities of both your own variables and your opponent's variables.
Which leads directly to the third and perhaps most crucial failure, according to the text, the complete refusal to engage in empathetic research.
Now, empathetic research in this context does not mean feeling sympathy or compassion for your enemy.
No, it is a cold, strategic term. Empathetic research means possessing the cognitive flexibility to recognize the humanity, the ingenuity, and the capacity for adaptation in your opponent. It means studying your adversary as a capable, evolving, intelligent system. If you refuse to do this, if you refuse to yield your rigid worldview to absorb new data about your opponent's capabilities, you are no longer fighting the actual enemy. You are fighting a fantasy projection.
The text concludes this historical analysis by stating that true mastery, whether in global strategy or personal development, requires a psychological state it calls dimensional homonymy.
We need to unpack that phrase because it's dense.
Think of the grammatical concept of a homonym. Two words that sound exactly the same but mean entirely different things depending on the context. The loud bark of a dog and the rough bark of an oak tree. Dimensional homonymy is the psychological capacity to recognize that things can exist in multiple contradictory valid states simultaneously.
It is the ability to hold contradictions without your brain breaking. You have to be able to say, I am the active, fierce driver of this startup company, A&DS. I am completely humbly at the mercy of the market's reception of our product. You have to be able to adjust your position of one wielding and yielding second by second.
It requires immense agility.
Let me try an original analogy here to make sure I'm grasping the physical feeling of this.
Yes, here.
It's like trying to steer a sailboat across the ocean by only ever turning the wheel to the right. You lock the wheel in one direction because you think, I am the captain, I am the one in the denominator, I turn the wheel right. You might feel like you are exerting total supreme control over the vessel, but you are really just trapped in an endless futile circle. If you actually want to cross the ocean, you have to turn right, you have to turn left, you have to hold steady, and crucially, you have to let the unpredictable ocean currents and the wind shape your path. You have to actively yield to the ocean in order to cross it.
That is a perfect, visceral encapsulation of the mechanics. The inversion kick is the act of turning the wheel the other way. It is the wisdom of letting the wind take the sail. The fatal flaw of supremacy is locking the wheel and screaming at the ocean to flatten out. True mastery requires a dynamic, constant equilibrium of wielding your skill and yielding to the context.
Okay, we have zoomed out to algebra, we've looked at Chomskyan linguistics, we've even analyzed global historical military strategy. Now, as we move into the final section of our deep dive, we are going to zoom all the way internally. We're going to tackle the deepest, most challenging philosophical realization in the source material. We spent this entire time talking about the self, the one that navigates the pseudo-algebraic system that yields and wields, that acts as the architect. But what exactly is this self?
This is the moment the framework completely transcends practical self-help or cognitive behavioral therapy and enters the realm of profound ancient metaphysics. To answer the question of what the one actually is, the sources present a beautiful, dense metaphysical poem titled Who is the Grin?
The poem is essentially a meditation on non-dual awareness. And for those who might not be familiar with that philosophical term, non-dual awareness is the realization that the traditional everyday split between the subject, you, the observer looking out at the world, and the object, the world, the environment, the things being observed, is actually an optical illusion of the mind.
The poem starts with an identity riddle that forces you to confront this illusion.
Hmm.
Who is the grin? For in is I, wherever the other is I be.
Let's break that down. In means the world, the space, the environment you are situated within your denominator, and I means your conscious self, the numerator. The poem boldly asserts that they are actually one and the same substance. Wherever the other is, there one may be.
It teaches that the everyday experience of life may seem incredibly fragmented. You feel like a small, separate, isolated individual moving through a chaotic, massive, separate world filled with other separate individuals and obstacles. But the poem argues that the fundamental act of experiencing is unchanged and whole. The observer looking at the tree and the tree being observed are not two different things. They are the exact same unified field of awareness reflecting upon itself.
The text uses this gorgeous phrase, in, as door. It says that the world, the environment, the friction, the chaotic schedules, all the things we usually think of as barriers or external objects to be manipulated or avoided are not actually barriers. They're the gateway to realization. Passing through in reveals that there was never any separation to begin with.
Once you truly master the pseudo-algebraic mapping, once you learn how to fluidly place your one and run the inversion kick without ego resistance, you eventually arrive at this ultimate mind-bending paradox. You aren't just a separate player moving variables around a game board. The board, the variables, and the player are entirely unified.
The poem spells this out. The me I am is in myself. So with mine as is in is itself, the inside and the outside completely merge into pure localized identity.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
But wait, hold on. Here's where it gets really interesting, and I have to challenge this ultimate conclusion. If I, the self, and in, the world, are the exact same thing, if there is no actual division between me and my environment, doesn't that make all this mathematical mapping totally pointless? Why did we just spend the last hour meticulously learning iterators, delineators, the synthesis operator, and the grueling full expression if it's all just an illusion of duality anyway?
That is the ultimate question. It is the final boss of this philosophy. And the resolution is incredibly elegant. The math isn't there to build new, permanent walls between you and reality. The math is a scaffolding tool designed to dissolve the false boundaries you have already built.
Ah, I see. We have to use the structure to dismantle the structure.
Exactly. Your ego is already mapping reality, but it's doing it poorly. It's doing it with supremacy and static maps. You use the rigorous, unforgiving logic of the metamatic system to exhaust the ego's relentless need for control. By rigorously mapping every variable, by perfectly balancing the wield and the yield, you eventually construct the ultimate, perfect equation. And when an equation is perfectly balanced, what happens? Both sides cancel each other out. And what is left when the equation cancels out?
Just zero. The empty space. Pure equilibrium.
Yes, leaving only pure, unified, non-dual presence. You finally stop fighting the environment because you realize you are the environment. As the text beautifully put it earlier in our discussion when talking about wieldable noun shifts, you bring your own weather. You don't bring your weather to fight the storm. You realize your awareness is the vast open space in which all weather occurs.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. You, the listener, we have taken you on a massive, demanding journey today. We started by realizing that your mind is running an outdated, static operating system filled with pop-ups and inherited, unexamined scripts. We introduced you to the deep grammar of success, teaching you to stop chasing empty, static nouns and start building wieldable nounships through the continuous practice of active orientation.
We taught you how to write the precise mathematical equations of your life using the pseudo-algebraic concept mapping system. We made sure you understand the painful but necessary truth that your environment, the denominator, will always shape and govern your talent, the numerator.
We showed you how to place yourself as the active unity operator, the one, choosing when to iterate and when to delineate. We warned you against the catastrophic trap of rigid supremacy by enforcing the inversion kick, the lost art of knowing when to yield to the ocean. And finally, we arrived at the profound metaphysical realization that you and the world you are trying to navigate are, fundamentally, one and the same unified field.
It is a complete architectural overhaul of how you perceive and interact with reality. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Something that builds on everything we've discussed today, but approaches the math from a radically different angle.
Lay it on us. What's the final piece?
We've spent this entire time talking about how you are the architect of your own meaning. We've talked about using the unity operator, the number one, to actively shape or consciously yield to the variables in your reality. But consider this. If the one is simply pure unified presence, as the poem Who is the Grin suggests, what happens to the math when you choose to intentionally assign the value of 0 to your ego?
Oh,
Think about it. If you completely remove the narrative surface self, the part of you that desperately needs to be right, that needs to achieve the goal, that needs to defend its fragile identity against criticism, if you remove that from the equation entirely, does the friction of resistance disappear with it? Think about what your daily equations, your stress levels, and your relationships would look like if you didn't just perfectly balance the variables, but completely surrendered the psychological need to measure them at all. What if true, ultimate mastery isn't about perfectly solving the equation, but realizing you no longer need to carry the whiteboard?
that is something that will keep me awake tonight. And maybe that is the ultimate final admin privilege, the ability to just turn the monitor off, stop measuring, and simply exist within the system. We hope this deep dive has given you the rigorous tools to open up your own internal activity monitor, force quit those exhausting background tabs, and step back into the world not just as a frustrated user, but as the conscious, dynamic, yielding architect of your own life. Thank you so much for joining us for this extensive journey, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.